welcome to today's show. I'm Charlotte, Product Director at 11FS. A few weeks ago, we released a report called Inclusive Design, Building Financial Services for Everyone. And this report took a deep dive into what inclusive design is, why it's important, and how you can embed it in your organisation. Since then, we've asked you, our listeners, to get involved and tell us what questions you've still got. So through our socials, what you want to know from our authors, what questions have been on your mind since you've read it. So I'm delighted to be joined by some of the brilliant minds behind the report to help answer those questions. First up, we've got Catalina Munteanu, who's an engineering manager. How are you doing today?
Quite pitchy, thank you.
Jolly good. And Rachel Pandian, product manager. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Yeah, excited to be here.
And last but not least, Ali McManus, lead designer. How are you doing, Ali?
Morning. All good.
Good. Amazing. Let's dive in. So we've got a bunch of questions from you. Thank you for sending them. And we're just going to get in and get started. So, Ali, if I could start with you just to get us rolling. What do lots of people or companies mistake inclusive design for? So what are they thinking it is versus what it actually is?
I think a lot of companies, when they try and implement an inclusive design, generally look at that broader definition, which is making things as usable and accessible as reasonably possible for the most people. And I think often they fall into the trap of just doing those two things. So they focus on, a good UX, trying to have sort of human-centered design, but also making it accessible, when it's so much broader than that. There's so many more demographics and different things you need to consider, things like circumstantial, non-visible disability, etc. I can use an example, perhaps from a previous bit of work that I did when we basically were doing a sort of a healthcare triaging system that they wanted to be incredibly visual. Now, this could tell you that actually there was some bad news and you needed to get things checked, and they wanted that to be filled with icons and really pretty, exciting illustrations, which isn't really fitting the mood from a circumstantial and emotional perspective. And when you think of it in that kind of context, it wasn't inclusive at all because it wasn't taking into account those circumstances.
Nice. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
Kat, Rachel, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think the biggest myth is that it falls to design when really even before you get to building a product, it's who you've got in the room and the kind of experiences that you're gathering and how you make decisions. You get this one idea and you think it's going to be super great and inclusive and you go with that and you immediately write off so many others that could be really important for the process. So I think Ali's right. It's just rather than thinking about simple and clear UX, what's the first opportunity you have to introduce it in? And it's probably sooner than you think.
Why should people care? It's nice to include people, but are there other reasons? What are the economic benefits or other benefits?
I think that there is an economic component to it. Demographically, people think only about inclusive design for people that have disabilities as permanent disabilities. Statistically, they are quite a significant number of people that find themselves in temporary disability. So you should try to make your product more inclusive, not only to gain new customers, but to make sure that the customers you already have, they're not excluded temporarily. And it's also a question of cost on a building perspective. Most people think that building an inclusive design will cost them more, which is not true. Using the right text, the right colors, the right iconography doesn't actually cost you a thing. There is not going to be a developer out there that actually charges you per good design. And also doing things like not using autoplay videos on your website actually will improve the performance of your website. So there are a lot of cost components that can be compounded to help you when you do an inclusive design.
I think there's quite a lot of evidence as well that suggests that people are really motivated by brands that want to include them. So particularly, there's loads of evidence to say that millennials and Gen Z are much more interested in purpose-led, values-aligned companies. But actually, you really see that with inclusive design. So people kind of turn away from brands that aren't demonstrating that kind of credibility. So I think from a loyalty and an acquisition perspective, there's probably a bit of a boost from inclusive design as well.
It's funny you mentioned that because most fintechs actually talk to millennials. Millennials currently don't hold the bulk of the money in the economy. And actually doing an inclusive design product that includes elderly people that might actually suffer from dementia it's good economically for you because those people hold a large amount of money and they need to be protected.
Yep, that's true. Okay, next question. Who's doing a great job on social media? Are there any quick wins you can give marketing managers?
I think if we look at it from like a content perspective, in terms of being representative in the marketing campaigns that you do, it's kind of really important to make sure that you prioritised sort of historically marginalised groups. And this just allows them to be represented and recognised. And I think that is like one of the first and most crucial steps in showing that you care about inclusivity. But also, there's always one fascinating one for me, which is if you're appealing to a very large demographic, if you look at the way that sports advertising has worked, especially for things like, running trainers and things like that, they have for years in their campaigns been incredibly diverse and inclusive because they've focused on that like outcome or that sort of emotive nature of achievement or progress or anything. And if you manage to create that emotion within that campaign, then you can be inclusive and it'll land with everyone.
So do you think that sports brands, do you think we can learn from sports brands more about how to do inclusive marketing?
Massively, because they have an incredibly big demographic to target, so then they need to appeal to all and have really focused on that level of storytelling. If you get the storytelling right and manage to communicate that outcome that people want, or your target demographic want, not just all people, but if you can focus on sort of that emotive output, then people relate to that more than whoever is identifying within that video. People identify with feeling stronger than other elements of identity.
And I think that's where sports brands have also done it well, where finance has typically not, is like they've kept it so simple. They've kept it around the emotion and the story and the thing that the person's trying to achieve. Whereas like a lot of financial companies come talking about cards and loans and mortgages that people aren't really interested in. They don't understand how it can help them in their like daily lives. And we've started to see a shift now with a lot of companies where it's making it more holistic and homely. But again, like if it's the cookie cutter house, white picket fence, to like mum and dad and kids, is that representative and inclusive for everyone? This is where that storytelling imagery comes in, thinking broader than just what's the typical financial product and who will use it. Think about really who's actually going to use this and who do we need to appeal to create that broader user base? Yeah,
I think there's all inclusive design probably comes back to do your research at the beginning. Because one of the things that there's been a definite increase in representation of various different previously excluded groups in advertising and marketing across the board, and including in financial services. But it still feels quite heavy-handed. It feels like it's been kind of conjured up by an advertising team, which it probably has, and not necessarily tested particularly rigorously. I had a conversation with somebody a few months ago about how do you show gay in an advert without showing a couple? And it's like you're trying to be representative for an excluded group, but actually you're further excluding people within that group because the only time they ever see themselves represented on screen is in this kind of perfect couple, in the gay equivalent of that white picket fence perfect family view. So I think there's still quite a long way to go. What part of that question that we haven't addressed is who's doing it well. So anybody we want to call out for good inclusive social media, particularly in the question?
I think Monzo, we've talked about them in our report, but Monzo do a really good job of really simple, clear, easy to communicate messaging. Like their tone of voice is always more around the person and the thing they're trying to achieve. It's always very human-centered. You don't, like when you go onto the Monzo app, you don't feel like you're talking to a robot. And I think that's the kind of stuff that invites more people to the table and to try new services that will actually benefit them in the long run. So Monzo's, I feel like we're going to talk about them a lot, but they're definitely up there.
I guess just before we wrap up on that question, there were a couple of, hygiene factors that we've talked about that are specifically kind of more in that marketing realm. And also, I think we were talking about this before we started filming. We're all very much in the product space. None of us are inherently marketers. So there are probably people out there that have loads more suggestions for how you should be doing this. But I think there were some things around All of the kind of big social networks these days have like alt tag functionality, so you can tag your images up, you can make it much more accessible. Like limit your use of emojis. I know it's not the most fun thing to say and everybody hates me when I go anti-emoji, but use fewer of them, use them at the end of your sentences. Keep your language really simple and clear is one of the key things, because then if your people aren't understanding what you're saying, so a friend of mine always used to say, if you don't understand the joke, it's never funny.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of whole kind of overall simplicity. Keep it kind of as universal as you can, and then you won't go far wrong. Okay, next question. A lot of companies talk the talk for inclusive design. How do you bridge the gap into walking the walk? So I guess my interpretation of this question is, how do you actually get from thinking it's a great idea to actually doing it in practice?
I've got like a few thoughts on this. I think the first thing is making sure that it's front and center with your decision making in the same way that commerciality is. I mean, all of this stuff is hand in hand, but for now we know that it's not best practice. So ways that you can do this and things that we're exploring at 11FS are having an inclusive design advocate on each project. It doesn't mean that that person's sole role is to only be inclusive design, because lots of people have lots of different skills to bring to the table on this, but their job is just to sense check to make sure what you're doing is on the right track. And the thing we talk about a lot in the report, though, and obviously the best way to do this is through research and making sure that you are collecting the right level of insights from across the different demographics, the people you know, the people you don't know that you should be speaking to, and having that robust process in place. And I think probably the final part for me is that it's a little bit to what we talked about before when it comes to like what the myths around inclusive design are. It starts in your decision-making process and like your own biases towards the things that work best for you and what you understand. And so making sure that your team is equipped to make decisions fairly and equitably, that's kind of the starting point. But I guess there are so many things. The first thing is just to do it, like get started and like start thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice point. Ali, Kat, anything you want to add to that?
I think you have to have a plan for it, for sure. We have to face the fact that there are quite a few products out there that are not inclusive at this point. They are not even accessible. And we also have to face the fact that more and more countries are making it a legal requirement. So sooner or later, this will catch up with these products. So they need a very well-structured plan to deal with this. Rebuilding something that was already built is a little bit harder than doing it from the start. And you have to be more strong when you do it. But maybe part of that plan is to see what are the overall advantages for the company. So I'm not only talking about you're not going to respect the law, you're going to get a fine, but it's also, let's say you have a mobile app or a website that doesn't actually is not properly tagged. So this means that somebody that actually is visually impaired cannot read it, but it also means that Google can't read it. So your SEO, it's a little bit like on the ground. Inclusive design, when you do a rethink, maybe shouldn't be taken by its own. You have to make sure that you embed it in the entire strategy of your business and make sure you take the decisions according to that. Some of them are quite important.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. There's a definite difference between companies that we talk to who have kind of baked inclusive design into everything they do, and the ones that come to us saying, I want an inclusive app. Yeah. It's kind of taking it from the core and building it out is probably the best way to do it. But that doesn't mean, I guess, if you're a lone designer on a team and nobody else in your organization has noticed that inclusive design is important yet, that you can't change anything. I think one of the things in the report that I really stand by is that if you just do one thing or kind of aim for that 1%, then that's going to have a big difference.
Yeah, and to add to kind of what Rachel said about starting as early as possible as well, and you mentioned it right at the top of the show as well, in that it often comes down to research. So even if you are that one person trying to find that thing, you can ensure that your research for whatever you're building, whether it be a product, a campaign, has diversity of insight, experience, thought from all sorts of different contexts and backgrounds, and that will at least help you get part of the way.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so one final question. what kind of developments and advancements would we like to see in the next 2 to 3 years in this space? So if you could have maybe if we all have one wish to the inclusive design wish bucket, who wants to go first with this one?
I'm good because we work in the financial services and I feel that they use so many acronyms that most of us are actually excluded. So my one wish is to change the language around financial products and financial institutions in a way that at least some of us feel like they understand what's going on.
I think we'd all like that.
Yeah. I'd like complete ubiquity of it, to be honest, to the point where doing big things on how to be inclusive is no longer a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, my big lofty dream is that this isn't like a second thought that we're like, oh, we built a product. Is it inclusive? But I guess that I think that this stuff, like to Ali's point, this stuff should be run like it was any other project. Like it should be run and set up in the same way that you would with most of your client engagements. Right now, we're a side conversation. Like, let's make it the main conversation.
I think as part of that is the kind of bringing it in from the moment in the bigger banks, at least slightly different in fintechs, but the people that are most interested in inclusive design are people that don't have any budget. So they're the head of vulnerability or head of inclusion, but they don't have any real spending power. So actually, they're sort of in the same position we are in that they can advocate for it and they can try and kind of get people thinking about the right things, but they can't actually really change anything. So I think if inclusive design could kind of shift into the centre ground, but I also think it would be great if there was no such thing as a head of inclusive design anymore, because we don't need one. It's just a head of design or a head of product, and it's just everybody's responsibility to make it happen. And I do feel like we'll probably get there. So as we're coming towards the end of the show, we want to finish off by asking one more question, which is, what do you hope that people will take away from the report after they read it? So they're going to watch this, they're going to go back, they're going to reread the report, which they've already read. What do you want them to take away from it?
That inclusive design is not a fuzzy concept, it's something that they will have to deal with sooner or later.
Okay. Ali?
So as a designer, I'd like other designers to add it to the list of considerations that they have for every project that they do, regardless of what nature that project is.
Okay. And Rachel?
Yeah. As a product manager, like this building inclusive products is the same as building good products. So bake it into your processes, your prioritization, your research, and making sure you've got enough time for that.
Nice. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. So in case people want to find us after this recording to continue the conversation and find out more about what we're doing, where can people find what you're getting up to? Kat?
The usual ones, LinkedIn, the 11FS website.
And Rachel?
LinkedIn, a very small and quiet Twitter every now and then.
Ali?
Just LinkedIn for me as well, and ali.mcmanus@11fs.com.
Same for me. You can find me on LinkedIn or on the 11FS website. That's all we've got time for this week. Make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok to stay up to date with all the cool stuff we're doing. And if you enjoy our show, do subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel, where you can also explore our one-to-one property spotlight and our in-depth explores videos, where we take mini deep dives into different topics in fintech, insurance, and crypto without the jargon, to help you expand your knowledge. And of course, please make sure download and read our report if you haven't already. You can find it on our website and in the description down below. Thank you.